Well, hello world historians. In this video, we will be going over the DBQ 6, the prompt, and go through those elements for the 5 documents to score, the 10 points on the WHAP exam for 2020. When you look at this prompt, the contextualization should tell us why are we looking at these Atlantic revolutions and why they cause societal changes in the Atlantic world. So that's why we always say go prior to 1770. What happened before then? And all these happened before then. All right, down to the thesis statement. So I have the 2 formulas put up here with both, a thesis point. May not like the wording so much, but I utilize these 2 formulas because if you fill them in properly, you'll get the point. Even if it might have may not flow grammatically and everything. But we got our time period. Within the time period, 2 significant, and remember what you put here is the skill and the topic of the prompt. So you have that change in Atlantic societies that's caused by the Atlantic revolutions. Then next, you're going to put the argument of your group 1, where the creation of the democratic form of government and did away, that should say, with monarch/nobility, because remember, you always want to put it in the past tense. And then you put the argument for group 2 and the wide acceptance of free speech. Perfect. Great 2-prong thesis that's focusing on that change in Atlantic societies. All right, the second piece, or the other thesis statement using the although, because, and therefore. So although Atlantic societies continue to be extremely patriarchal, remember that is a counterclaim. Because Bolivar united much of Latin America to break the political norms, there's one specific piece of evidence, and slaves in Haiti take justice into their own hands. There's a second piece of specific evidence. Therefore, the Atlantic societies probably transformed to democratic nations that use popular sovereignty and free speech during 1770 and 1840. Perfect. Now let's go into the documents. So for each document, of course, you want to use a piece of evidence from there. Paraphrase what you saw in that document. Use a specific piece of evidence. Try not to quote. And then you want to use that and explain it to an argument. That's why if you do take some time to plan and you have your 2 assertions and you have your body paragraph to assertion, you're arguing to that point. Why is that original assertion? Why is that a key change in society for the Atlantic world? And then the other thing that you could do with documents, of course, is the sourcing piece. So I put some ideas of sourcing for each of these documents here as well. So when thinking about sourcing, know the source line. Understand its importance. So with Doc 1, we got the Constitution of Georgia, 1777. Remember, in 1776, the United States claimed independence. So that could be an easy historical situation that you could, let us know that, hey, this document was written just after, the Atlantic Revolution of, the Americas, of, the United States of America. Because remember, the Americas are North America, South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. That's all considered the Americas. So the main idea in document 1 is this constitution describing who's allowed to vote and the restrictions of nobility claims. And the argument that this evidence could support is becoming independent, changing society to be democratic instead of monarch noble, because you see that they are kind of discriminating against nobility to be able to vote or take claims to government positions. And, talking about voting is one of the key democratic pieces. So some possible sourcing, we talked about the historical situation already. And then this is one of those classic type of documents. This source is a constitution. So the purpose of any constitution is to lay the law of the land for all people to follow, all citizens, or even non-citizens, to be honest. These are the rules. So they are creating the new norms and the new status quo in society. So that's kind of the huge impact. That's the way I would go to source this particular document. Now, Doc 2, this source line, we got a political expert and member of parliament, and he's writing a pamphlet in 1790. So the main idea here is the author can talk freely about the French Revolution, even if it contrasts to his hometown or his, where he's from in Britain. And then he talks about how the revolution couldn't happen in Britain due to traditions, to the strong traditions that they have. Now, most students even use this particular document, and I think you're like, I even had struggles thinking, oh, how can I use this? And then once I got through all of them, then I was like, oh, perfect. This one, is a great way to, throw into that acceptance of free speech, because he's here, he's saying, technically, and he probably truly feels, because he is a member of parliament, that there are these key traditions. I mean, still look at Great Britain. To this day, they still have a queen. The queen doesn't necessarily have any political authority, but they still look up to the traditions that have been set since prior to 1790 in this instance. Now, possible sourcing, you could talk about the purpose of a pamphlet at this time period, how that is to reach, certain audiences in even fact. The point of view of the British Parliament member, a British Parliament member is one of, royal pride and conservative. It makes sense that he's talking about, hey, Britain won't revolt because they're stuck to tradition. However, we will kind of take the influence of free speech and this democratic stuff to be able to freely talk about what's going on here. Now, in Doc 3, the source line is Olympe de Gouges' manifesto in 1791. The main idea in Doc 3 is that women are human too. They deserve protection of natural rights. This argument could support that revolutions change the world to accept free speech, even for women. Now, do the women actually get free speech in this instance? Well, you don't necessarily, we don't have of any stories of, this lady ever being persecuted or anything for that. At least not that I can know or remember in history. But some females do, depending on where you are. But we do definitely have this supporting the free speech argument, because she is speaking her mind and trying to get others to support her and make this change, make sure that women have the same rights as males. So the purpose, this is a manifesto, which is a public declaration of policy and aims, especially one used before an election by a political party or a candidate. So she wrote many of these little manifestos, and it was always to get things to be changed. That was one of her big things. She's one of those Enlightenment thinkers that we know of. Her point of view, these are very radical ideas, because women, usually, it's not to the 20th century in the United States that women really get many rights, but there are little changes along the way, through feminism and so forth. She also had ideas for universal suffrage and emancipation. Of this time, this is what makes her point of view significant, that women are still considered better seen and not heard. And then the historical situation of this document, you could really go into the French Revolution here. In document 4, the source line here is British officers' illustration of the revenge of Black Army by the French, or on the French, in 1805. So the main idea we see in this illustration is that Black men and army men are hanging French soldiers. And there, you see the one in the big forefront where it's happening, but you see them all along the image themselves. It's, you know, it's not just one man. It's pretty much all the French soldiers that this black army can find. And, you know, it is revenge, so it's because of how they were treated. So this argument, or this illustration, could support an argument that would be revolutions changed to remove the noble royal French government from Haiti here. So I think one of the easiest things here is a historical situation. This is the Haiti Revolution. They claimed independence in 1801. Here, this painting was finished in 1805. So it's like, this is the aftermath. This is how, you know, the Haitians are getting back at their French oppressors. The purpose, you know, of an illustration is to always, you know, some art piece is to capture this moment in this time. Remember, this is before cameras. I mean, they're just starting to have cameras and things like that. So things, you know, illustrations are still very popular to capture this moment in time. Since, I mean, in reality, this type of thing, you never seen black men hanging white men, essentially, right? So that could be something kind of significant to go towards your argument. And most likely the audience could be British officials, or, I mean, as it's an illustration, it could be anyone in time. This artist of this, you know, this British officer is actually, he documented lots of interactions in Haiti with the former slaves, and, you know, through their independence movement. So he's famously known for doing this in this area. If you're in a document and you did the historical situation and you did the point of view about the same document, you don't get 2 sourcing points for that. That's just one source, because you're sourcing the document. And same thing with evidence beyond the document. It's got to be clear evidence that could almost stand alone, but you're combining it with the documents to make your argument stronger. So when you break down the points, so here are all the points. You know, when you add up all the points, you got to think of your timing. You only have 45 minutes to dissect that prompt, read the 5 documents, and kind of make some sense of it all, and then start writing, right? So these are your points. That's why if you use that graphic organizer I gave you, you know, there's a little checkoff list. So you can kind of check things off as you go through. Now, I've had lots of students go, what should I focus on? It depends on you. It really depends on you and your strengths. You got to know your strengths and weaknesses. We've been together for the whole year, and technically we've always been working on all of these skills. We might have worked specifically and gave you the definition of contextualization in the very, very beginning, but all of these things, we've always been working with documents and evaluating them and arguing with them and all of these things. We've been doing sourcing and having you think about the author. So all of this has been practiced throughout, but now you're putting it all together to show, hey, I can think like a historian. I got what College Board wants you to get from this course. There's certain things that are content, and there's certain things that are skills. Like the thesis statement is a skill. Now, contextualization, that's a lot of content, because you're thinking of, you know, what's the broader situation that we got here. Now, it is a little bit of skill too, but it has a lot of content based behind it. When you look at the documents and evidence, that's totally 100% just using skills that you're able to pull out, you know, understand the document, pull out some specific evidence and put it towards an argument. That's 100% skill. Evidence beyond the documents. You have a lot of, if you know your content, it's easier to pull evidence beyond the document. So if you get a prompt and it's from a time period you're not very familiar with, you might struggle with evidence beyond the document. But then if you get a time period and a topic, you know, like politics, and, you know, that would be a key thing for me. I would rock that prompt if it dealt with politics in a certain time period, especially 1450 to 1750, I feel. Sourcing, that's another skill. It can lead into a little bit of content when we think about the historical situation. And that's where I hoped that those Kahoots that you practice with, that maybe you took down some notes of some, you know, key words and things to help you put things into perspective. And then complexity, if you've watched, anti-social studies, and any other teacher or whatnot, that is just a very difficult point to earn in the short time period, unless it's a style of writing that you're normally used to. But again, complexity, 1 point. Sourcing, you get 1 point per successful sourcing piece that you do. I always say try to source 3 documents. Like in the document bunch that we just went through for this DBQ 6, I think you could have easily sourced 3 things. So much historical situation that could fit in there. Evidence beyond the documents, like I said, with this grouping, I couldn't think of anything. Afterwards, when I had more time than 45 minutes to think, I'm like, I could have totally utilized Toussaint Louverture, or, some of the other things I thought about later on. You should totally get the 3 points with the documents. Remember, you get for just using the information from 2 documents. So you get 1 point. If you use the documents, 2 documents, and you connect it to an argument that is for the prompt. Sometimes you connect it to an argument, but it doesn't answer the prompt, and that's where you might lose points on. So that's where knowing the prompt is so important. And for those of you that are doing your individualized Zooms with DBQ6, like if you just want me to look at certain things, let me know, and I'll be prepared to just go over that. Or if you don't want to do individual Zoom, you don't need to either. But that's what I've been doing, is finding out what you are doing right and what you could work on, if it's something little or something big. And then context, that's just 1 point. And if you can't think of the context in the beginning, you could stick it at the end. I just always practice, thinking of the big picture and narrowing it down to your thesis statement. And the thesis also, again, if you have time after you've written everything, write your thesis statement 1 more time at the end. And don't copy it from the beginning of whatever you wrote in the beginning of your thesis. Just write the thesis statement again. Think of, have that formula written out. Like, I think the easiest one is within the time period, 2 significant, list the skill and the topic of the prompt were, what's your argument of group 1? What's your argument of group 2? Boom, you should get your thesis point. And then once you've written it, it might come out differently because you've now actually written everything out. So, good luck to you all. You're going to rock it. I just know it because you've been working so hard and you guys have been doing so great. So proud of you.